Everybody. We have a training on the use of Zipforms today. Today we're going to focus on how to respond to offers or counter offers using Zipforms. Everybody should be muted by now. Okay. There'll be a few people joining us late. We got a lot of people showing up late today. In any case, we'll get started with the meeting. The reason why I have a Zipform training on how to respond to offers and counter offers using Zipform is that I often find agents are not understanding the certain terms or certain features within the forms to be able to use the forms effectively. That's what I'm teaching. To demonstrate today's teachings, I'm going to use a sample zip form for one of the transactions that I've worked on or am working on. Usually, if you're the listing agent, you will receive emails these days, most of the time by emails, offers that will come from the selling agent. So if you are getting emails, usually they are in the form of PDF files. So first of all, you open up the PDF file. Now in this particular case, I've already imported the PDF file into Zipform. If you have not done that, you have to go to your email, and then when you see the file in the email, attached to your email, first you do is you either download it into your desktop or laptop, or you do like what I do. I usually save it in my Google Drive. In fact, I think it's probably more efficient to save all the documents in the Google Drive folder. You will name the Google Drive folder according to the property address. For example, I'll show you my Google Drive folder. All right. Let's say, for example, I open up my Google Drive folder, and I look for the property address. This is the property I'm interested in. I've already previously created this Google Drive folder. So if it is your first time importing a document into Google Drive, you must first name your Google Drive folder. If you're the listing agent or even the selling agent for them, you will typically name the Google Drive folder according to the property address. Makes it a lot easier to look for documents. Say, for example, I get a document. And there's a document attached. I want to save it to my Google Drive folder. This is my Google Drive. And inside the subfolder, because this is an escrow document, so saving it. Now, usually, initially, I'll save it in the interim folder until I'm convinced that all the signatures that are there are there. In other words, there are no missing signatures or no missing information. Until then, everything goes into the interim folder. Okay, interim is temporary. So I'll move it here. Okay, so this is how I save it. And then from there, from my Google Drive folder, I can usually import documents into my Zipform. And how do I do that? Okay. Let's go to my Zipform. adjustment too. Now, if I want to import something, let's say a document, I'll first browse for a file, and I look for my Google Drive here, and let's say I look for a particular file. Here. I'll simply pull a document just for illustration. Purchase it. Open it. I have a duplicate file, okay? Because I already previously imported this file, I'm doing it again just for illustration purposes. Let's see if I open it. This will be an offer that I received. Typically, when I receive an offer, certainly I'll review it to see what's in it, right? But I don't have to view it within Zipform. I can view it, using Adobe. Now, I browse through at least when I receive the offer, I usually don't pay much attention to the disclosure and the possible representation of more than one buyer. So first thing I do is I look at the first page of the offer, finding out who's made it and what the offer price is, and find out who the selling agent is. So in this case, the offer price is $830,000, and I usually would like to check to make sure they give me the proper amount for the deposit. I want to make sure I have at least 3%. So I do the math. I probably have around $25,000. So that number is okay. Now, if it's less than 3%, I certainly will want to state in the that I want to. Okay. And then it also tells me that this one has got a loan. Usually when I look at an offer, I want to know if the buyer has a loan. Now, if buyer has a loan, I would definitely look for the buyer. Let's see if I can. Now, if buyer has a loan, usually I want to find out, did the buyer provide enough time for close of escrow? So I'll go up here and take a look. The buyer is asking for 45 days, okay? In most cases, if it's a local, if it's a U.S. citizen or green card holder, if it's not a foreign loan, 45 days is usually sufficient, okay? Even for conventional, usually you can do it much less than 45 days. Even FHA, you can accomplish that in 45 days. But if it's a foreigner's loan, sometimes it could take as much as 60 days, right? So I have to remind myself that if I accept this buyer's offer, and if it's a foreigner's loan, I may have to have 60 days to close the escrow. Okay? Do I have a better offer? Do I have a better buyer than this one? If I don't, 45 days is probably okay, because even if the buyer asks for 15-day extension, I suppose we can live with that. So, okay, just something to keep in mind. Now, if it's a conventional loan, if the buyer has like a 30-day escrow period, conventional loan is very tough to go below any kind of offer that has a loan. It's tough to close in less than 30 days. So usually you need a minimum of 30 days. Okay. So if the guy submits an offer with a pre-approval, when you receive a pre-approval, if it is just a letter, it really doesn't tell me much about, how likely this buyer is going to get approved in a timely manner. It doesn't really tell me much. Sometimes you get a pre-approval letter from a mortgage broker that tells you, okay, this person is pre-approved for so much for the purchase price and what interest and what type of loan. Now, the what type of loan actually is helpful if it's conventional. You can actually close a conventional loan in 30 days. Okay. But if it's a certain type of loan that might require more time, at least I'll be able to gauge for myself. Is this a buyer's offer who I want to recommend to my seller to accept? Because sometimes people try to use a lower number in order to get the offer accepted, and when they're in escrow, they wind up asking. Okay, so something for you to keep in mind. Now, usually, as I mentioned before in my line messages, a pre-approval letter with the DU findings attached. If you don't know what a DU finding is, a DU finding is a finding that is generated by a computer program that is run through the Fannie Mae system. So if it has DU findings, you can actually learn some things from the DU findings. If you get a pre-approval letter that has approved or eligible in the finding, usually you get a higher degree of confidence that the borrower will actually get approved. If it's approved or eligible, you don't require any kind of manual underwriting. Okay. If you don't require any kind of manual underwriting, you can actually close the loan sooner. And if a loan that requires manual underwriting, what type of loan requires manual underwriting? Usually the ones that has proceed with caution finding. You look at the DU finding, it says proceed with caution. Typically this type of loan requires manual underwriting, and usually there may be delay. There is more challenges ahead as far as this loan is concerned. So something for you to keep in mind. So if I have two loans, one that has pre-approval only without DU finding, another one that has pre-approval plus DU finding. The one that has pre-approval plus DU finding, and if it's approved or eligible, it actually is more persuasive in terms of buyers ultimately getting the loan. Okay. Something you want to do. So if I present an offer for a buyer, now if I can get the buyer's lender, now if I'm the one doing it, and if the DU finding is a good one, I'll definitely include the DU finding in my pre-approval. If the DU finding is not so great, you might as well not include it. Because if you include a DU finding that says proceed with caution, if the listing agent is familiar with how to interpret DU findings. Your buyer's offer is gonna be looked at with disfavor. So you only include the DU finding if it's favorable, if it's really good deal. All right, let's move on. So we get an offer. Those are the first few things that you look at. You have to kind of you have to look at the entire offer. Sometimes the price may be good, but there are other terms and conditions that are not good. Sometimes you may have a buyer that makes a very high offer, but you look at his paperwork, you look at his proof of funds, look like a pretty shaky buyer. You know, what good does it do with the highest offer when you look at his proof of funds? He doesn't have enough proof of funds. Okay. Some listing agents are really good. They will scrutinize the proof of funds. They will look at, well, what day is what day was the statement issued? If the statement was issued 2 months ago, certainly a good listing agent would ask the buyer to provide the latest statement. Now, right now it's October, right? So you know in a few days the September statement may be available. So in the meantime, you get an offer from a buyer that gives you as the latest statements for the month of August. You know that you wait a few extra days, you might receive the September statement. But the August statement looks pretty good. It looks like he's got a lot of money. Now, if the guy is applying for a loan that requires $100,000 in down payment, and you can tell how much down payment his loan requires. Usually the offer will tell you. In this particular case, if you look at the offer, right, the deposit was $25,000, right? And then the balance of the down payment is $24,000. There's about $250,000 for the proposed down payment. So the down payment is actually higher than 25%, right? So this one looks pretty good. You know, most conventional loans, if you have 25%, you're okay. So this one looks pretty good. So I'm happy. I'm satisfied with that. Sometimes if the down payment is too little, but regardless of what the down payment is, but if you look at the proof of funds, the balances don't even add up to the down payment. You know, you got an issue. You might talk to the selling agent about providing more proof of funds if the bank statements don't show the sufficient amount of money available, not only to make the down payment, but what about reserve? Where's the guy going to get his reserve? Most loans require at least a minimum of 2 months. Many loans require like 6 months reserve. So you look at this guy, and then his down payment is like $250,000. You look at his bank statements, he only has $250,000. First of all, you ask him, well, where are you going to get the closing costs? Where's the money going to come from? And in order to get your loan approved, you need to show reserve. What are you going to use as reserve, right? Some people, they can use their retirement accounts as reserve. But these are the things to ask the selling agent if you want to seriously consider this offer. Right? All right, next page. Now, usually the ones that I pay much attention to is, first of all, as far as I'm concerned, appraisal contingency and loan contingency, they are basically two of the same contingency. Appraisal and loan, I don't really care if, I don't really care if the appraisal contingency is there or not. All I care about is the loan contingency. However, as between two offers that of the same ranking or similar ranking, one has appraisal contingency, the other one does not have appraisal contingency. Is one better than the other because one does not have appraisal contingency? The other one has appraisal contingency. Certainly, let's say, for example, I represent a buyer. I submit an offer for $1 million, and I have a loan contingency. I also have an appraisal contingency. And then during the escrow, an appraisal was performed. The appraised value was $950,000. Now, because the buyer has an appraisal contingency, can the buyer say, well, I didn't quite appraise to the $1 million that I wanted for the value of the property, therefore I'm canceling? Yes, because there is an appraisal contingency, right? Because when you have an appraisal contingency, it really doesn't say how much the appraised value would have to be less than the offer price in order for the buyer to have the right to cancel. What if it's only $5,000 off? What if the purchase price that is offered is $1 million and the appraisal value came in at $995,000 and the guy said, well, I didn't quite appraise to $1 million, I'll cancel. But as a practical matter, if the guy likes the property, he would have no incentive to cancel if the appraised value comes in at $905,000. You just chip in an extra $5,000. But that is not to say that every buyer thinks the same. Some buyers are very picky. If I don't get $1 million, even if it's like a few $1,000s off, I am not buying. Either that, or I go to the seller, you need to knock down the price to $995, or I will cancel. Okay? So, yeah, when there is an appraisal contingency, a buyer can cancel in good faith if it's based on a appraised value that is less than the purchase price. Okay? Now, if you look at the appraisal contingency, it says this agreement is or is not. In this case, the guy did not have an appraisal contingency. So certainly, I like that if I'm the seller or the selling agent. Listing agent. Another thing about the appraisal contingency, I wish they could do a better job on the appraisal contingency because this one, it doesn't give you an option if you're the listing agent to state that if the appraisal comes in at above certain price, the buyer is not entitled to cancel. Let's say if it's $995 or better, then the buyer can cancel. It doesn't really quite state that. So even if it's a few $1,000 less than the purchase price, the buyer can technically cancel in good faith. Certainly, if I'm looking at several offers, one has appraisal contingency, the other one doesn't. The one that doesn't have appraisal contingency will appear to be more attractive. Okay. So, if I am the selling agent, do I want or do I not want an appraisal contingency? Well, to make my offer more attractive, if I can avoid checking that box for to have appraisal contingency, or if I can select not contingent upon appraisal, it definitely behooves me to check that box that says it's not contingent. Well, how do I decide if I check it or don't check it? I will tell you this though. In most cases, if I'm representing the buyer, I will make my offer not contingent upon appraisal if I have a loan. However, if I do not have a loan, I better make sure that my offer is contingent upon appraisal. So in other words, if you have an all-cash offer, can you have an appraisal contingency if it's all cash? Yes, you can if you wish, right? Huh? Why do you need that? It's a good question. No. Here, this is how it goes. If you have an all-cash offer, but you have not performed an appraisal yet, right? Certainly, if you have that appraisal contingency, let's say you make an all-cash offer for $1 million. You are only doing appraisal for your own benefit. It has nothing to do with the loan, right? Because I want to know if I'm overpaying the property too much. Why can't I order my own appraisal? I pay like $500, right? All cash offer, I pay $500, get my own appraisal, and it comes in at $950,000. I have just offered a price that is $50,000 higher than the appraised value. Does it mean I overpay though? Appraisal sometimes is a judgmental thing. It comes in at 950, and you're like, you offer like $100 million, you're like $50,000 higher than appraisal. You really like the house. Maybe it really doesn't matter because you know what? It's all cash. It doesn't affect your loan, right? You don't have a loan to worry about. So I think if you want to make your offer more attractive, if you're an all cash buyer, you decide for yourself already, even before you submit an offer. Is this the price I want? Once you've decided, I don't care what the appraised value is. This is what I'm paying. And don't check the appraisal contingency. You don't need it. Correct. If I represent the buyer, if I'm the selling agent, I talk to my buyer. We have not done an appraisal yet. Do you plan on doing an appraisal? If you don't, then don't check the appraisal contingency box. It will make your offer more attractive. But if you plan on doing an appraisal, then by all means, check the appraisal contingency box. However, it's going to make your offer less attractive to other ones, especially in some areas where the market is still very hot in favor of the seller, like San Jose. It's very competitive in San Jose. Okay, so the price range like 800,000 price. That's the you will be you will lose out if you have too many contingencies. So try not to check appraisal contingency unless your buyer insists on doing an appraisal, right? If he is an all cash offer, by all means, do not check appraisal contingency unless the buyer say, I want to do an appraisal. All right? So now, if you already have a loan contingency, do you need to check the appraisal contingency or not? That's right. If you have a loan contingency, why bother checking appraisal? Because if you have a loan contingency, for many buyers, their biggest problem is the appraised value. The biggest problem in getting their loan approved is the appraised value, most of the time. Many buyers, once they made up their mind to buy a house, they will do whatever that is necessary for them to get the loan approved. Certain things are within their control. Certain things are not within their control. Now, things that are within their control will be the liens against them. They may have like unpaid bills, stuff like that. Those things they can go ahead and take care of. Those things would have been discovered when you pull a credit report on them. Okay, but there may be last minute thing that happened during escrow. When you pull the credit report, they don't show up, but during escrow, suddenly the lender found something that is not on that credit report, but is nonetheless a debt that they have to pay. But those things are within the buyer's control. The buyer can actually pay it. The one thing that is not, a couple of things not within buyer's control, a few things. One of them has to do with appraised value. Okay. Now, some people can say, well, you get a low appraised value, maybe you get another appraiser to do it. But it doesn't work for all lenders. Lenders sometimes they just stick to one appraiser. They don't allow you to keep switching appraiser just because you don't like it. No, if a buyer has an appraisal that comes in lower than the offered price, I know some buyer was just approach the listing agent and say, I want you to lower the price, or tell your seller to lower the price, so that I can still close my loan. Okay. So certainly, if you're the listing agent, when you get so many different offers, some guys their offer price is very high, but and then they have a loan, quite likely when they do the appraisal, it's going to come lower than purchase price. That quite likely they will tell you, well, I want to lower the price. I want you to lower the price, or I won't buy it. Okay? So those buyers, you can kind of anticipate the problem ahead of time. There are some buyers that are represented by very experienced selling agents. This is what they do. They prepare an offer. They tell the listing agent, well, if the appraised value comes in at below the purchase price, but no worse than $20,000 below the purchase price, my buyer will make up the difference. If it's greater than $20,000 below the purchase price, my buyer maintain the appraisal continues. If you get this kind of offer, now if you are the selling agent, certainly this will look more attractive to the seller, right? This is not an offer that says, well, if the appraised value comes in at no worse than $20,000 below the purchase price, my buyer will make up the difference and will buy it regardless. I've had received offers like that. And if you have a buyer willing to do that, if he loves the house so much that he doesn't care if he paid higher than the appraised value by a certain amount, he still wants it, then by all means put in such a provision in the offer to make your buyer's offer look attractive, right? Okay. All right, keep going. And and of course, when you prepare a counter offer, you need to check with your title company who's paying for what. For NHD is almost 99.9% the seller's paying for. And then for the escrow fee, it really depends on where you are, which county your property is at. In some county, it's the seller paying for escrow fee. In some county, the buyer is paying for escrow fee. In Southern California, they split it. Okay. And then on the title insurance, same thing. You check with your title rep to find out who's paying for title insurance. Okay. Now, remember, today we're talking about offers and counter offers, so I will not go too much into detail on offer. But I'm just telling you what things to look for when you're preparing a counter offer. Okay. And certainly, if I'm evaluating an offer, I'm always looking for the contingency period for inspection. Some buyers decided that they don't need any inspection. Okay, those are going to look more attractive to the seller. In Santa Clara County, there are still many buyers submitting offers without inspection. I did one recently without inspection contingency because the buyer wanted the house. Buyer didn't care about doing inspection because the house is so new and good condition. Sometimes you just have to evaluate, what are the risks if you don't have an inspection contingency. If the buyer does not have the inspection contingency, make sure you have the buyer sign an inspection waiver. It's called buyer's inspection waiver form. Make sure you have to protect yourself. Okay, this is risk management, and that's a Zipform. All right. So now this particular buyer has 17 days. Now, well, we picked this offer because we didn't have better offers, so we picked this. But usually 17 is too long. You do not need 17 days to do your physical inspection. All you need is 7 days. You can cover all the inspections within 7 days. So in my case, I usually use 7 days. Okay? So if I see, if I'm the listing agent, I see 17 days like that, I certainly look at this offer with this favor. If I do a counter, I might counter 7-day contingency. I don't want them to have 17 days. Okay? If I have choices, sometimes I don't have choices. Sometimes I only got one offer. That basically is generally what you look for. The rest of it is pretty standard. Okay. Of course, it's always important to look for, make sure that you have the buyer signature. Okay. Now, assuming that we're picking this particular offer, so now it's time to prepare a counter offer. Well, there are two ways to prepare counter offer. One is just a regular counteroffer, and the other one is multiple counteroffer. What are the advantages and disadvantages of preparing a counteroffer versus a multiple counteroffer? First of all, let's talk about uh, when is it that you are allowed to use multiple counteroffers? The word multiple means you are submitting several counteroffers to different buyers. That's what multiple counteroffers, which gives you the right to not be bound by any acceptance to the multiple counteroffer. Let's say you send out, you receive like 3 offers from 3 different buyers, right? They all come in at different prices, but your seller, now you're the listing agent. Usually you are the one that make recommendations to your seller. If I'm the listing agent, I get multiple offers. I always use multiple counter offer. Well, not always, but I generally would use multiple counter offer. Why would I want to do that? Well, first of all, if it's a hot market like in the seller's market, I'm sending a message to all the buyers that you guys are competing against each other. Now, let's say one guy comes in at 500,000. Let's say my listed price is 500,000. One guy comes in at 500,000, the other one 525. That one is 495, right? So the highest offer I got is 525. But I think my seller would accept 525, right? So even though my seller would accept 525, I may still want to do multiple counter offers to see if I can get more for my seller. What would be the risk of me preparing a multiple counter offer for 535, which is only $10,000 more than the highest offer that I got, right? So I submit a multiple counter offer of 535 to 3 different buyers who submitted offers on my list. If I'm a selling agent, I receive a multiple counter offer. I know that possibly I have competition, which is why I'm receiving multiple counter offer. Okay? And what do I tell my buyer? I have to tell my buyer that this is called a multiple counter offer. Now, if my buyer looks at it and says 535, accept it now. I want it. And if your buyer goes ahead and signs acceptance on the multiple counter offer for 535, especially the guy who offered the highest price, 525, does that mean that we have a binding contract already? No, because a multiple counter offer, even if accepted by the buyer, it's not effective until it is countersigned by the seller. In other words, I'm the seller. I sent out 3 different multiple counter offers at 535. Let's say they're all 535, right? Send out 535, all of them, same, right? And they all accept. Am I in danger now because I have 3 accepted contracts? No, because multiple counter offer is not final, it's not effective until accepted by the buyer and also later countersigned by the seller. In other words, the seller has to countersign to let the buyer know now this is the binding contract. Without the seller's counter signature, even if the multiple counter offer is accepted by the buyer, it is not a binding contract. So you, as a selling agent, would have to explain to your buyer, look, what we got is multiple counter offer. Don't be so happy that you get the price you want, the 535. Because if you sign it and give it to them, there's no guarantee the seller will pick you. The seller may still pick someone else. Okay? Now, one other question about sending out multiple counter offers. Now, given the scenario that I just gave you, does the seller have to offer the same amount on the multiple counter offers? That do they all have to say 535, 535, 535? There is no law that says that. In other words, the seller can discriminate as far as pricing goes. Now, this guy offered $495, that guy offered $500, this guy offered $525, but I could say to myself, all right, how about try different prices? The guy who is the lowest, who I like the best because it's all cash. The guy who is the highest, $525, who I like the worst because I looked at all his information. He looks like a pretty shaky buyer because he's got pre-approval and with very little down, and he has no reserves just by looking at his bank statements. I know that's a pretty shaky buyer, but he's got the highest offer. All right. So what should I do? Should I offer 535 across the board, or the only reason I offer 535 is I was just trying to figure out how much extra I can squeeze from each buyer. But my listing agent just told me that, hey, you know what, your property value is probably 515. Okay, but I offer 535 because I want to see how much more I can squeeze. Now, if I send out 535, they all accept. Great, I picked the guy that offered me 495 all cash earlier because now he accepts, right? And I can thank the other two selling agents. Sorry, thanks for working hard. Didn't get the deal. But I also have to ask myself, how likely is this guy going to accept my 535? What if he looks at it and says, oh, that's a big margin from what I offered? He walks away. I just lost an all cash buyer. Now I'm stuck with these other two, correct? So when you decide whether you want to do a counter offer or multiple counter offer, you have to evaluate each buyer. And whether you use the same price or not, you have to evaluate each buyer. How likely is this buyer going to stick around and continue to negotiate with me? If I make a multiple counter offer 535, this buyer is probably going to be thinking, hey, I'm all cash. I'm supposed to be the best offer, even though my price, he doesn't know how much the other offer, but he knows he's all cash, right? He's going to be thinking to himself, well, you know what, 535, that's way too much. Now, what if the 495 doesn't even make a counter and just walk away? It's possible. If you make a 435 like that, you might just walk away. So you have to think carefully when you make multiple counters. Number one, do you want to make it? Number two, and most of the time you should make a multiple counter offer. It's really a psychological advantage. It makes the buyer all panic. they all get, they don't get their challenges when they have competition. So you always want to do multiple counter offer, unless it's a unique situation where you don't do it. Okay. For example, if you only have one offer that comes in, is it proper to still do multiple counter offers? To me, that's misleading. You only send out one counter offer, and you are making multiple. Number one, it is misleading. Number two, it is not necessarily an advantage. Some buyer may take it that there is competition, forget it, I move on to another property. You have to speak out louder if you want me to. Yeah, because if you only get one offer, morally and ethically, it will be misleading to your counterpart, who's also a realtor. You're basically misleading them that you're sending out multiple counter offers. By definition, multiple means more than one. But if you want to be explicit, you tell them, well, I'm sending you a multiple counter offer, but you're the only one. Then you're not misleading. But he's going to laugh. All right, what am I supposed to do with you? You only got one offer, and then you send me multiple counter offer. which means that if my buyer accepts this, then we will have to wait for your seller signature before we know it's binding, right? So I don't think it's proper though. I think it's misleading. If you only got one offer, you send out seller multiple counter offers. Moreover, it's really not an advantage all the time. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. So I think you might as well be honest. If you only got one offer, send out counter offer instead of multiple counter offers, right? Okay. Let's move on and continue. So I'm ready. Now, assuming that in this case I only receive one offer, so that's easy. So I will respond to this offer. Now, what is it about this offer that I don't like? Basically, everything is okay. I don't have any major issue on this offer except the 17-day inspection contingency problem. So I will. There are two ways to approach this thing. If you only got one offer, right, and it's a property that's difficult to sell, you might as well, if you're the listing agent, you might as well get on the phone and talk to the selling agent. So my seller likes everything. The only thing he doesn't like is the inspection contingency. In this case, you wouldn't really go back and forth. You just go ahead and tell the guy, resubmit an offer with a 7-day contingency. You know, if you can avoid using the using counteroffer form, avoid it altogether. Because if you can communicate with the selling agent, all he has to do is to make one minute change and change it. Just resubmit a new offer and then you make your seller sign. This is exactly what we did in this situation because I looked at this thing, everything looks fine, right? In fact, I've already communicated with him. He had previously submitted an offer with a lower price, and then we just kind of went back and forth on the phone about the price, and the rest of the stuff I think we can kind of overlook, but so it's just the price. So instead of me submitting a counter offer to him, I just say, all right, change the price to this price. And he say, okay, changes the price, and then submit it, and then I make my seller sign it in one clean contract, as opposed to one offer and then counter offer. You don't really want to do that if you can avoid it. Just about the only time you want to do that is perhaps you're not able to communicate very well with the selling agent, or you're the type who doesn't want to talk to people on the phone. You'd rather just communicate by submitting a counter offer. If you want to do that, that's fine. So in this case, you would prepare, let's say, for example, just a regular offer, right? Counter offer. So you would just put SCO. That stands for seller counter offer. So usually I just use abbreviation. Don't want to look for a form, right? Okay. All right. You look for that form that you just imported, right? So here, I just found it. Okay. Now, assuming that you have everybody's information input already, right? Okay. Now, this will be number one, and you have today's date, and then you have this is the date on the buyer's offer, whatever the date is. Okay. And then you have the buyer's name, seller's name, and then if here if you look at this, A and B are just standard terms. So basically, what A and B means is that now look at A. Basically, A means the terms and conditions are accepted subject to the following. So if there are no changes, then A and B still requires that all the initials by the parties are initial. Okay. Say the paragraphs in the offer that require initials by all parties but are not initialed by all parties are excluded from the final agreement. Now, this is very important because, if you're ever in a lawsuit and if the attorney is looking for a loophole, to not perform a contract, attorney goes back to the offer and check all the initials and check all the signatures. If they find that some initials are missing, and if it's favorable to his client, he will use this 1A and say, well, this is not initialed by all parties, therefore this provision has been excluded from the final agreement. But this one also say, unless specifically referenced for inclusion in paragraph 1C or another counteroffer on addendum. What that means is, if, for example, you prepare a counteroffer that is accepted by the buyer, both parties need to go back and ratify the original contract. What does it mean to ratify the original offer? For the buyer, on the buyer side, when the buyer submits the offer, hopefully he would have initialed everything and he would have signed everything. But if you don't go back and ratify, if you're the seller, you don't go back and ratify the offer, you have a problem with 1A over there. So you must always go back and ratify the offer. Make sure that your seller signatures are all there and your seller's initials are all there on the offer. Okay? That's why this one is very, very important. B says, unless otherwise agreed in writing, down payment and loan payment will be adjusted in the same proportion as in the original offer. Now, this is put in there for the simple reason that, for example, the guy comes in at $830,000 and I want to raise the price to $860,000. So instead of stating in C what the new deposit amount is, B kind of take care of that because it's by proportion, right? So the escrow looks at this, the down payment, but that's the down payment, it's not the deposit. So the down payment and loan amount will be adjusted in the same proportion as in the order. So B only covers the down payment and loan amount. It doesn't cover the deposit. So if you want to go back with the $860,000 purchase price, under C, you should probably adjust the deposit to 3% of $860,000, which is a higher number than $25,000 deposit. Okay, so whatever new terms and conditions you want to put them in here. So that will be your counteroffer, right? Now let's say, for example, you send this over. You see, we did counter at 848. Now let's say we counter 848, and if it's accepted by the buyer, and if accepted by the buyer, you will see the seller signature here and the buyer signature here. But that's just on the counteroffer form. Remember I talked about ratifying the original offer? What does it mean to ratify the offer? This is what it means, I'll tell you. See, for me to ratify the original offer, I need to have my seller sign here. And I need to go back and do my e-sign thing because this is a PDF, right? And of course, this is what I do. Say, for example, I want to e-sign now, okay, because I need to ratify the original offer. Here, this is a document I need to have my seller ratify. So I ask my seller, so these are my seller's name. So I'll check my seller's name, and it may require my signature as well. So I'm just going to check my signature. If I'm the first person to sign, I'll check my name first. And the second person to sign, you check his name second. And the third person to sign, you check his name third, in the order you want it. Okay, and then I say done. Okay. Now, previously, you would have input the emails into the party portion of that folder. And then you click next, right? So now I'm going to ratify this particular offer. After the buyer has accepted my seller's counteroffer. To ratify it, I just need to put the signatures where they should be. This one, you see, if you notice, this is where the seller is supposed to sign. So I put the seller signature here, and as the first seller, and the second seller, I put the second seller signature here, right? Okay. So, and I will finish that wherever I need the seller to sign or initial, I make sure because if an initial is missing, that provision is not effective, correct? According to the counteroffer. If an initial is missing, that provision is not effective. So I got to make sure all the initials are there. Wherever there is a place for initial, make sure you had it covered. And that's part of the job of a transaction coordinator. It's transaction coordinator's job to check your work, but you have to do the work for the transaction coordinator to check it. So your job would be to go down each page. At the bottom of each page, oftentimes there are places where you're supposed to initial or have your seller initial to ratify this thing, right? Now, if the seller does not initial, then you have issue later on with the attorney because he's going to say, well, my seller did not initial, therefore, all of the provisions that appear on this offer is not applicable to my client, right? So I want initial, so I click initial. Didn't mean to do that. Okay, so if I want to do initial, this is what I do. Okay, initial for the first seller, then initial for the second seller. You are supposed to do it for every single page that calls for initials by your seller. And you are supposed to have signed every single signature block where your seller is supposed to sign. Now, I'm not going to do every page for you for illustration purposes because I wouldn't have time for that, but you are supposed to do it for every single page. Do not leave out any signature. And I just explained to you the reason why. Okay? Because if you left out an important initial, certain provisions are not effective anymore. Now you got a defective contract. Now you got a problem. Okay? Make sure that every place where you need an initial is initial. Right? Do not leave anything out. Okay? There is one place where many agents forgot. I want to show you what that is, which is the last page of the offer. And it's kind of important. Now, most agents know how to do the initial thing that I just showed you. That's one thing that they keep forgetting, which is this one right here. Now, of course, I never forget about your this liquidated damages clause. You forget that, that is a big deal. This one here, never forget that. Okay, some people will get mad at you if you forgot. Okay, dispute resolution. These days I kind of initial it. I used to not want to initial, but these days I do. So initial the arbitration clause. Okay. The rest is self-explanatory. You just go ahead and do that when you're actually doing it. This one is kind of important, which is right underneath paragraph 32. Now, if you want to add like a text, you can use the text box, okay? But they will not let you do any texting, insert any text unless there's a signature associated with that. So let me go ahead and add this signature here. Once I have added this signature, I can now go ahead and add a text on this one. Now, this one here where it says seller's acceptance is subject to attached counteroffer. Remember, you have a counteroffer. So don't forget to check this box. And I can actually put a check sign over here, right? And it wants me to apply, I apply it, right? And here's that X is for you to delete, it's not the actual check. The actual check mark is within this box right here. So you want to place the box right over that box. So you have a check mark over here, all right? And then that's why you need to have this checkbox there, because you have an accepted counteroffer, which is part of this contract. So you're going to have this checkbox here. And then here is where you insert the date, I think. That's right. You have to insert the date for the counteroffer, whatever the date is. So how do I insert the date? Well, I can add a text over here. I add a text over here. This text will allow me to insert the date. So I put, let's say, today's date, right? They apply. You see the date? I just put the date right on top of it. So this date is the same date as the signed counteroffer. If the counteroffer is signed, accepted on October 3rd, I will put October 3rd over here. Okay? Don't forget this and don't forget that. If you forget, I'll be mad at you. Okay? And then, of course, you complete all the signatures. But this is one where many agents forgot. Okay? You're supposed to put if you have a counteroffer, if you don't, leave it blank. Sometimes there's no counteroffer, so you leave it blank. But if there is, you're supposed to put the date of the acceptance of the counteroffer here, and then put a check mark to indicate that there is an attached document. Okay? Now, there is one more item that many agents forgot, which is this one right here. To complete the form, if you are the listing agent, you're supposed to complete this part, and you're supposed to put your initial right here. So in this case, I'm the listing agent, so I need to put my initial somewhere. Okay, I put my initial here. This is my initial. It says here, do not initial is making a counter offer. That's right. Because I'm making a counter offer, I'm not initialing. But if you're not making a counter offer, if you're straight out accepting the offer by the buyer and there's no multiple, then you put the initial here, right? But because in this case I'm making a counter offer, I don't complete that portion there. Okay? I just leave it blank. Okay? Went back here. Now, if you in fact don't have you did not make a counter offer, then the listing agent will have to fill out this part, the initial, and then the listing agent will have to indicate here on what day the listing agent presented this offer to the seller, at what time. Okay. Some lenders are particular. If it's missing, they ask you to go back and correct it. So don't wait for the lender to tell you. Sometimes it causes delay. So if you are handling an offer without a counter offer and there's no counter offer, this is where you have to fill in. Okay. So put in the date the offer was presented to the seller and the time the offer was presented to the seller. And that should take care of it. That completes it. Okay. And if you've done everything that I told you to do earlier, you would have a very complete signed document, contract document that makes everybody happy. Makes me happy, makes your transaction coordinator happy, and it makes the lender happy, makes the escrow happy too. So just by taking these extra steps, it actually makes everybody's job a lot easier. Okay. Now I realize we've exceeded the 1 hour mark, so I'm going to quickly show you what a multiple counter offer looks like. Okay. Now let's look at a multiple counter offer. Usually I just if I'm looking for a form, right, I just type in the abbreviation. It's a lot easier to look for a form. SMCO, right? Seller multiple counter offer 1. So I'll show you how to fill out if your seller decides to do a multiple counter offer, this is how you fill out a multiple counter offer. Sometimes it's easier to just look for here. Okay. Now, so instead of doing a counter offer, I have the right circumstance to do a multiple counter offer, so I prepare one. Remember, I'm doing multiple of them. So I may have 3 different versions for 3 different buyers if it turns out that I got different buyers to deal with, right? So this information about buyer will be different because depending on who you send the multiple counter offer to. And then the date will be different too, because different buyers submitted the offers on different dates. So make sure you got this information correct. I don't want to see blank over here. If I receive your file, I want to make sure, you want to make sure that you put in the date here. Now this is the date when you prepare the multiple counteroffer, and this is the date on the buyer's offer. They can have 3 different dates depending on when they submit the offer. And then here, there are a couple of places. Now, if you want to present a multiple counteroffer, this is where you put in the other terms. And 1A here is similar to the one that is in the counteroffer. And B is also similar. So 1A and B, you already know what it is. C is just additional terms that you don't agree. You want the buyer to agree, right? Of course, if you have any addendum, you can always include the addendum, right? You're attaching an addendum. Sometimes you don't have enough space. You want to attach an addendum. Check here and then put addendum 1. Okay. Now, this is the important language that says sellers making multiple counteroffers to other prospective buyers on terms that may or may not be the same as in this multiple counteroffer. This multiple counteroffer does not bind seller and buyer unless all of the following occur in the time specified below. Seller signs in paragraph 5. So in other words, this multiple counteroffer is not effective until the seller countersigns number 5. If the seller never countersigns number 5, it doesn't matter if the buyer has already accepted the counteroffer. In order for it to be binding, number 5 would have to be signed by the seller. It seems to me, oh, actually, not only that, the multiple counteroffer is signed by the seller, and also they must also sign box number 8 in order for it to be effective. So basically, initially when they give the multiple counteroffer, they sign paragraph 5, and when they ultimately decide which buyer they want, they sign 8. So if 5 is signed but 8 never signed, you don't have a binding contract. In order for that to be a binding contract, you need number 5 signed as well as number 8 signed. Don't forget that. Some agents that are not familiar with this procedure, they are very happy that their buyer the buyer has already signed, and then the seller has already signed number 5, thinking that they have a contract. In fact, they don't. And then they call up the agent and say, how come you guys did not open escrow? And then the listing agent has to explain, this is a multiple counteroffer. We never picked you guys. We picked somebody else. We never signed number 8. If you never sign number 8, your buyers were never picked. Okay? So it's important you know how to use this form, okay? Don't be like a fool waiting for an escrow to be open when number 8 is never checked or never signed by the seller. Okay? And of course, I think this is for the listing agent, and it says confirmation of acceptance. A copy of the signed seller selection was personally received by buyer or buyer's agent. Oh, this is actually for the selling agent. So if you're the selling agent, you receive signed paragraph 8, you need to go ahead and complete this. Okay, this is for selling agent, not for listing agent. Earlier on the offer, we have one that is for the listing agent. So, okay, so don't forget to fill this out. Okay, if you're the selling agent. Now, once you have this executed, fully executed, you now have a binding contract. You got a multiple remember, even if this is signed, the multiple counteroffer, you still need to go back and ratify your original offer like I showed you earlier. Remember, in addition to signed counteroffer or signed multiple counteroffer, your contract may not be good unless the offer is ratified by all parties. Okay? Don't forget to do the ratification, because that's important, and it makes it more complete, clean, and professional. Now, one thing I have to warn you about Zipform. Zipform, sometimes they can play tricks on you. On Zipform, especially when you don't have PDFs, you're working within Zipform, You know how Zipform automatically populate the initials for you? So when Zipform automatically populates the initial for you, you don't think that they will miss any initial, would you? You probably won't think that. They do, even when they automatically populate the seller's initials for you. You know what I mean by automatically populate? When you do the e-sign, instead of manually do what I just did, you know, to assign initials and things, the system does it for you. However, it has defects. So sometimes even when they auto-populate, you check every single page to make sure all the initials are there. Now, if you don't check, it turns out that you were fooled by the system, you were fooled by the machine, and you left out page number 4 for the seller, and it wasn't initial. Then you get into that possible legal argument that it is not initial, it does not apply to my client that the attorney can make, right? So you want to avoid that situation altogether. Make sure you check every single initial, every stage of the way. Now, let's say, for example, if I'm a lawyer, right? If a buyer decided that he doesn't want the property anymore, but he has no proper reason or ground to cancel, he comes to me. He said, well, Attorney Ken, what can you do? I need to get out. I need to save my deposit. First thing I do, I check. Are all the initials there? Now, if a particular provision it's supposed to have an initial is not there and I can use it, I'll use it to my buyer's advantage. So you want to catch it early. You don't want to catch it like just before close of escrow. But usually, of course, when it's that close to close of escrow, buyer doesn't cancel. Buyer usually cancel, I would say probably in the middle of the escrow. So that tells me that you got to make sure all the initials are there, all the signatures are there before you get to the middle point, right? To make sure that, you know, your seller is not going to be unhappy with you. Suddenly you have a buyer who wind up having the right to cancel because you forgot to make sure all the initials are there, right? So I think that's something for you to know, to pay more attention to, is that the contract does say that if a provision requires initials, and if not all parties initials, then that provision is not part of the contract. I think that the CAR's attorney, when they wrote in this one, I don't think they're talking about the initials at the lower right-hand corner of each page. Because if they are talking about those initials, many agents miss those initials. I think they're talking more about things like arbitration clause or liquidated damages. For arbitration clause and liquidated damages, if both sides don't sign, then the provision don't apply. You need both parties to sign. But the way I'm reading this, though, okay, now if you read this thing, I think there's some ambiguity here. If you look at 1A, it says paragraphs. It says paragraphs. It says paragraphs. It doesn't say page. It says paragraphs. Now, you see the ambiguity there because on the lower right-hand corner, you got both parties. You're supposed to have the buyer's initial or the seller's initial, right? And if the initials are missing, can the seller or the buyer argue that, well, everything that is in this page is not supposed to be, because I can see there might be some gray area in the attorney can. None of those provisions apply to my client because it says paragraphs in the offer that require initials by all parties. Now, what's the meaning of having those initial boxes at the lower right-hand corner? Does it mean that if the party don't initial that page, none of this provision applies to them? I think it can be argued. I think it can be argued that way too. So you got to be careful. Make sure you got all the initials there. Okay. All right. That's about wrap up for today's presentation, and I thank you all for participating. Next week we will discuss notices to perform. We'll discuss demand to close escrow, plus the other good stuff. Okay. But certainly, I hope you pick this up. In any case, we have this recorded. So if you ever have to do offer or you have to do counter offer or multiple counter offer, do go back and watch this recording because I think you're going to get a lot of information from this. All right, thanks. Let me go ahead and stop the recording.